I'll show you a couple of things that I did to make working with these big barrels easier. One, I gave it ears. A very medieval thing to do. So when I want to lift this, what I do is I'll get a stick, run it through, and I can lift the two people. It's really easy. You can lift the whole thing up with spent grain and everything. There is a plug, a hole in the bottom, but it's not in the middle, it's off to the side. So it drains in between one of these quadrants. And I have a plugging stick. As you can hear, plugs the hole well. I already waterlogged the barrel a couple of days ago, so it's at least a one-day process. Everything's swollen, so I shouldn't be losing any of my stuff. So I've started my juniper infusion. I added fresh sprigs of juniper to my water, which I'm heating up. And once this boils, and boils well and gets dark like a tea, then I will use that to clean my wooden barrel with. I'm using one wooden barrel in this system. I'm using it's both the mash, heating the mash, extracting all the sugars, but I'm also using it as the filter. So there's no separate. There's no boiling step in this stage either. I'm just using stones. My juniper infusion is boiling. So now it's time to add that to the barrel. Add it in here, do a second good quick rinse. Make sure to get all the walls wet. It smells so good. There we go. Now we'll add the juniper that I picked earlier. So for the juniper in my brew, I'm using the Virginia juniper, Juniperus virginianus, because that is what I have growing in my backyard, and I have real big, nice ones. The traditional juniper for brewing is the common juniper, or Juniperus communis. Common juniper looks more like pine needles, except all the way around. So they're very, very pokey, very spiky. It's like a porcupine tree, which makes it very, very useful as a filter, because it really velcros together. This stuff doesn't work too badly either. I've filtered with it successfully many times. It also has the similar flavor profile. When the immigrants came over to America, they started using this to brew with as well. Make a nice filter bed, especially tight around the spigot, of course. So that was about 5 gallons. And then I'm adding my filter stones. So, another reason why we need to do another rinse is to clean the stones as well. So the bed of stones gives us a good hard surface to start mixing later on. And that should have sterilized everything pretty much. Actually, I'll just keep that in. So now we're going to add the mold, the grist, ground up malted grains, And I have a combination of oats and barley. I did go for the more smoked version. So I've got smoked cherry and midnight wheat and some of the darker colors. And some really pale ones. So it's a medley. So I'll put some in. And then the next step is to add some more water. So I'll be adding water and grain alternatively, because I don't want to over water my mash, but I don't want the grains not to be very well wetted either. So adding it in layers helps to prevent clumping. Of course, this barrel can take quite a bit more, but once we start adding the rocks, you'll also find that rocks take up quite a lot of space. Make sure it's all in there. And now I'm immediately like, oh, that's such a good idea, putting rocks at the bottom. What a huge difference that makes. I want it to be saturated enough that it isn't, you see this is too dry, so it needs to be saturated enough that we have liquid, but not so much as more of a porridge. So I'm adding cold water straight from the well. So this is about 50-60 degrees. So we'll have to soak up for a bit and then I'll start adding the rocks. So one of the reasons I think this works as a good plausible technique for Viking brewing is that this is a very large volume vat. By that time metal kettles were expensive. And it would be very unlikely that every homestead had one. That's why I'm heating in the little one, because that's a cooking vessel, and that they should have had. So we do know that they were doing something with rocks, because there have been huge amounts of finds of heat cracked rocks that are then used as foundations for new farms. So we know that they were doing something with it. And cooking and brewing seems to be a likely option. The next step will be adding some rocks, which of course is the best step. So I put some water up for sparging. I've got about a 5-gallon bucket, maybe 1.5 bucket of volume of granite rocks in there. You want to use rocks that don't explode. It doesn't harm the beer, but it can harm you. So use granite. And I did find, I've used granite and marble, that they do break over time. But they don't explode, they crumble. And they don't like immediately fall apart when you put them in the fire. They slowly crack in the mesh. And I collect them and I use them as ornamental gravel in our garden. And that also explains why there are foundations of cracked rocks meters deep under very old Viking era Scandinavian homesteads. The mesh ended up absorbing most of the liquid, so I added the other kettle of hot water as well. There's one thing that I learned from previous brews too doing this, that always have a kettle on the water, you don't know when you need it. Because of the adding the hot stones, we do want this to be a slurry, not a porridge. So there is something for the stones to sink into. Use fairly coarsely grounded mold, so there isn't a lot of flour and dust that goes into the mesh. the filter we're using, the Juniper, it's not very fine. And all those fine particulates, they will go through. And that is something that we will be dealing with by draining some off and putting it back on top to catch the first fine particulates until the filter clogs up, filters better. Another thing that I've seen in traditional brewing accounts is to make a collar of dead grass around the plug, so the dead grass also acts as a filter. And I haven't tried that yet. That is, I've always used the Juniper, but if you want to do this and you don't have Juniper, use straw or long dried grass and tie it around like a witch's broom and have it splay out at the bottom. I'm using blacksmith tongs. Historic information shows very similar wooden and metal tongs being used for this kind of brewing. I need to grab one quick because I am burning. Ouch, ouch, ouch. And we did well. The first one is in. And it's already bubbling and boiling away. And it's making foam. So I'm gonna grab a couple of more. I was already getting a little bit of a scent, but just adding these 3 rocks, I'm definitely starting to smell the malt now. So the bigger the rocks, the longer they'll be hot. Smaller rocks cool down quicker, but they're easy to maneuver around. So I'm going to grab my stirring stick and start stirring. Because we want everything to warm up. And what I'm waiting for is for it to warm up to about 160, 170 and get protein break, which we'll recognize by a lot of foam. So we've got a little bit here already. And once we have that, I will keep adding rocks occasionally to keep it hot, but not too hot, to get the enzyme conversion and get all the sugars out. Because I want them in my liquor, not in my grain. Because anything that stays in the grain only benefits my animals. Okay, I'm gonna go grab a few more. Having stones at the bottom, those flat slates, that was a phenomenal idea. It is really dark. This looks phenomenal. The mash was at about 150. So I added a whole bunch more stones, but I'm also, as you see, I'm running out of liquor. So I'm heating up a little bit more water to add to it. The steaming and evaporation using the stone method is quite significant. Yeah, this gives a little bit more room to add rocks. We're still not quite high enough yet. Another couple 20 degrees. And I might have to start taking some rocks out to make room find some. See, they're covered in grain, and I don't want to lose the grain. A witch's cauldron. So the bubbles are starting to get like thick, and the liquor has really turned a dark color brown. So it is time to start watering and sparging, and I will also run through a couple of like a gallon or two, put it back on top and recirculate. So now I'll draw some out through the bottom and see what I find. It looks like coffee. It is beautiful. And I'll put this back on top. So I'll be drawing out a little bit more wort to start my yeast starter. It's a kwijk that is a combination of 3 different house yeasts. So that should be about enough. As expected, the cool down went real quick. So this is about a nice temperature, maybe a little too hot even. This is the kwijk. The underpitching is better than overpitching, so I'm only using 1 bag. And there we go. And it should take a couple of hours for the wort to slowly go through, and I might even run it through like twice or 3 times depending on how clear it comes out. So by dinner this should be bubbly and ready to pitch. Last time it didn't, so I pitched it anyway, and it didn't seem to have made any difference. The next day it was bubbling away like crazy. It might have been a little too cool. I'm used to brewing with regular beer and wine yeast, which goes a little cooler. So I started a hops and bog myrtle bag, and I put it under the drip as much as I can, and this will slowly drip through. Bog myrtle is pretty strong and it's got a bit of an unusual taste, so don't overdo it. I think I used like 2 grams a gallon or something. So this time I had a pinch and put that in with my hops. I used a handful of hops, so partial hops, partial bog myrtle. I put my wool klapperrock over the edge to keep the bugs out a little bit. And as you can see, we're getting quite a bit of wort. I'm going to get a rope so I can tie the bag into the wort. Having it under the spigot doesn't really work. It's just a hole in the bottom and it splatters everywhere. There's no determined downpour. And we'll just keep draining and sparging until there's no more sweetness coming out. So we've been draining for about an hour now. I've got about 2 gallons out, I think. and it's slowly draining. I sparged twice with one kettle of hot water, and I think that's it. The top is starting to look fairly bleak, fairly pale. So now it's just a matter of getting the rest out and waiting for the kwijk to start. So it looks like there's still a little bit of sweetness left in the beer, in the malt.
Yeah.
So I'm going to add a little bit more liquor or hot water on top. Push it out until it's all gone. There.